Hi, I'm Tiffany, and this is my mom, Lin. She has a private counseling practice where she works with people who are experiencing anxiety. Right now, there's a lot of people going through fear and anxiety.
Yeah, some of them for the very first time. Others have been battling it for many years, and this pandemic has only exacerbated it. I want to clarify right away that I don't have any answers that are going to take anxiety away altogether.
Right, but it can be helpful to have an open conversation about it.
Yes, talking about it can reduce the intensity of our feelings. Understanding what's going on in our body can also be helpful. There are some strategies we can use to help manage our anxiety. First, I'd like to take shame off the table. Especially as Christians, sometimes we feel embarrassed or just guilty about being worried or anxious. There's just a lot of anxiety free floating in the community right now, and it's impacting all of us.
Not to mention all the different facts and hearsay that is floating around that's making it feel like more and more of a threat to our well-being.
Threat is a good word to use, Tiffany, when it comes to what's happening in our bodies. You know, you've probably heard about animals having a fight, flight, or freeze defense strategy. Well, humans are wired in the same way. Our brain sends messages to our body that tells us to run, fight, or hide, and it sends chemicals that help us to be able to do that and respond quickly. Whether that's a shot of adrenaline that gives us the energy we need to fight or to run, or whether it's a calming down mechanism that slows us down to freeze.
But all this is happening in a fraction of a second. We don't even consciously realize our bodies are responding this way. It makes me think of the difference between calling 911 and the police department. It's when you need help right this instant instead of later that day or tomorrow.
Exactly. Our wonderful brain has learned to respond to certain signals that say danger to us by short-circuiting the thinking part of our brain to get our bodies to react quickly. If you are driving in a car and the car in front of you slams on its brakes, you wouldn't want to have to stop and think about whether to slam on your brakes, right?
No, of course not.
No. And have you ever noticed at these times that sometimes your heart rate speeds up, you start breathing faster, sometimes you even get the shakes? Thank you, adrenaline. That's your body at work providing you with energy and oxygen to move quickly and efficiently.
That's all good stuff, though. We need our bodies to react in those situations.
Yes, we'd be in real trouble if they didn't. But sometimes our brain gets a little overzealous and we don't slow down enough to get the thinking part of our brain online to decide whether it's a real risk or not. Kind of like panicking and calling 911 when really a police department would have been sufficient to deal with the problem. But sometimes we don't know until we've already made the call, and then we have to assess then what the need is. Meanwhile, we can still be experiencing things like irritation, edginess, aggression, fatigue, or a general sense of anxiety. This is a normal response of our body to the signals that our brain is getting, and we don't have to be ashamed or embarrassed about it.
So let's say that we're not in a life-threatening situation. We don't have any toddlers running out into the streets. There's no brake lights in front of us. No one's threatening our lives are about to have a heart attack. What then? What do we do in those situations?
Well, if you're not in imminent danger, give yourself a pause. Slow down and listen to what's happening inside your body. How does your body want to move? If you can find a way to do that constructively, that will use up some of those chemical messengers in your body and kind of help to detox you a little bit.
So if I'm feeling restlessness, I know I feel that in my shoulders and my knees. As odd as that sounds, I could go on a run to kind of move through that restlessness.
That would be fantastic. Or you could dance around, jump up and down, swing your arms, even just walk around. It doesn't have to be complicated or drawn out. It just is good to get moving. Sometimes you might need to just take some deep belly breaths and activate the calming part of your nervous system to slow your heart rate down. Exercise, of course, is the best stress reliever, and it also usually helps to improve our mood. But I should note that if you're in the middle of a panic attack, unless you've been practicing these things, it may not be helpful. And sometimes we need some extra help to be able to learn to implement some of these things in our life, whether that means getting counseling or sometimes we need some medication to help slow us down.
So in that, we would be respecting and honoring that our bodies are trying to tell us that something needs attention.
Yes, God has given us all kinds of instructions in the Bible that tell us about taking care of our bodies. And I think that means that He wants us to honor them. He's designed our bodies to do things to get our attention, maybe because we tend to rely on our minds and not pay attention to what our bodies are telling us. I know I'm guilty about that. If we can remember that our bodily perceptions are messengers, it might help us to keep from panicking and feeling so helpless. And then we can get the judgment part of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, online, thinking and strategizing about the best way to minimize or contain the danger. Say if your city was under attack. If you knew who the enemy was, then you would have a better way to mobilize and your resources and defend it, right? If you knew what damage the enemy was capable of inflicting.
Yeah, I would definitely feel better if I knew what dangers to watch for, so then I would know when to execute my defense plan.
Right. Or pretend with me that in the bedroom at night there's a threat of some sort. You don't know whether it's a person, whether it's an animal, maybe it's just a booby trap. But if you go and shooting or swinging, you might miss altogether, or you might hit your wife instead of the mouse. It could be helpful to know what the threat is so you can respond more accurately. In the same way, if we identify the shadow monsters of our anxiety, that enables us to deal with it more strategically and more effectively. Right now, we're all experiencing a variety of difficulties because of the coronavirus, and it impacts each one of us differently. Just because I'm struggling with something different than what you're struggling doesn't mean that one of us is being ridiculous.
Yeah, it just means that we're different people with different histories and experiences that impact our perspectives. But what if we don't know what we're afraid of?
Well, we can often get a clue from what was happening right before we started having symptoms, or whether someone was talking about something or we were right before that. But there's some common ones that it might be easy to figure out just by thinking about it. Are we worried about a loved one who's vulnerable and maybe at risk of dying? Are worried about dying ourselves or being terribly ill? Have we lost a job? A business closed down? Is it difficult to get basic supplies, get bills paid, get vital medications? Maybe you're feeling isolated and cut off from family and friends. Are you bored, feeling like it's difficult to get meaningful activity happening in your life? Are you worried about the loss of personal freedoms? Maybe you're just having a hard time getting diapers and wipes to take care of your baby. And some people are feeling ashamed or worried about rejection from other people because they're making different choices based on their convictions and values. And what if you cough in public and you're not even sick? It's not going to be a magic button to push to name these things, but it can help us to think about what the potential results are. It kind of takes the power out of the fear. For example, I had a conversation with my mom, and early on, we were concerned about what if one of us would get sick. Her worry was that I wouldn't tell her, and I would keep information from her. And so she was able to make it clear that she didn't want that to happen. I was worried about if she went to the hospital and I couldn't be there with her, how awful that would be for both of us. Obviously, we didn't change the outcome. We still don't know what will happen there, but we both feel better for having talked about it and shared our concerns with one another.
I'm reminded at times like these to tell the people I care about how much I appreciate the time that I have with them while we're together.
That can help us to live without regrets. And there is some value in facing the possibility of death in that it informs us on how to live. It doesn't take away the sorrow, and there's lots of feelings that we all are going to need to deal with along the way here. It doesn't eliminate those feelings altogether. But talking about some of these things can reduce the internal pressure that we feel, which lowers the stress on our minds and our bodies and our souls.
Loss of work and income is something that many people are dealing with right now. Many people, and a couple people in our family, work in the construction business, and we're expecting it to hit us a little bit harder in the months to come as people start prioritizing, and rightly so, their utilities, their food, and their other bills instead of paying into that remodel or new home. We've talked about how that's something that we're both concerned about. What have you been doing with that?
Well, honestly, Tiffany, this is something I have to work at. It's not just a one-time decision I make that, oh, I'm not going to worry anymore. It's more of a daily discipline, or however often it occurs. But what I try to do is interrupt my thoughts when I catch myself worrying and give myself a little talk. Lin, you've been in a position before where you were worried about bills, and how did that work out? What was it like? What is the worst that could happen? And I remember how even though there were parts that weren't very fun and I had to give up things that we couldn't afford that I would normally choose, we ate a little differently, I did make it through. And it might not have been fun, but there were also some blessings in there that I didn't expect. God provided a weekend away, a gourmet meal from friends, even a patch of lawn that someone put in time for a family celebration. We got through it. And I find that it's really a battle in our minds, first of all, which is sometimes called self-talk. And then I take action. What can I do? So like a lot of other people, I've planted a little bit bigger garden this year. I'm trying to be careful about my spending now, and I'm supporting my husband as he takes jobs he might not ordinarily take, and it changes our schedule.
No matter what a worry is, naming it allows us to think creatively about what to do with it.
Yes, and when we take action of some sort, it distracts us from the worry, which is really a useless activity, and it gives us a sense of empowerment. We don't feel quite so helpless, and it helps us to mobilize the resources we do have at our disposal. And then when I've done everything I'm able to do, I choose to trust a good God to help me endure whatever's left over. And, I just have to keep working at it. The fear of the unknown is almost always worse than the known. And as I name things that I'm afraid of, it also helps me to be aware of the things that I don't have to worry about right now and what I can be grateful for. And gratitude gives us a bigger perspective also that helps us to get through these times.
And talking with other people gives them the opportunity to offer us resources, give us ideas, or just offer empathetic support.
Yes, and it's actually anxiety reducing for both parties because neither one feels isolated anymore. Open and honest communication with each other always helps to improve relationships also. And healthy relationships always make life more pleasant.
Yeah. So to summarize, some of the things that we can do to take charge of our anxiety and manage it includes deep breathing, movement, acknowledging of our fears and feelings, self-talk, prayer, creative problem solving, talking to others, gratitude, distraction, and learning to think differently about things.
I've just touched on some of these ideas here. There's a wealth of information online in books and to be gained from talking with other people that will deal with many of these strategies in greater depth. Anxiety affects our whole person, so we need to use all the weapons at our disposal. Take care of your bodily needs. Acknowledge your feelings, accept them, and deal with them. Practice thinking accurately and helpfully. Talk to each other so we don't experience isolation, and access all the spiritual weapons at your disposal. Our lives have been disrupted, but that doesn't mean we have to be helpless. I encourage you to think about one thing you could do one thing you could change in your life to help manage or reduce your anxiety.
So you're saying that this pandemic doesn't have to negatively influence our lives, but we can use it as an opportunity to make choices that reduce our anxiety and help us to live more intentionally and healthfully.
Yes.
I want to remind our viewers that many churches are offering online services that offer encouragement and support. Many health practitioners, counselors have telehealth services available as well if you need some extra support coping during this time, including the Salem Free Clinic, which offers counseling to people without insurance or the means to pay for it. Thanks for joining us with this discussion today.